Imagine waking up to find out your neighbor is actually trying to steal part of your yard, legally. That's right. I opened my mailbox one morning and found a formal complaint filed by my neighbor claiming that a section of my property, land I had maintained, landscaped, and paid taxes on, actually belonged to her. No conversation. No courtesy. Just a cold, entitled grab backed by paperwork she probably didn't even understand. But what she didn't realize was that she picked the wrong homeowner to mess with. I wasn't about to roll over. I did my homework, gathered my proof, and what came next made her regret ever trying to take what wasn't hers. Hey everyone, welcome back to Voice of Tales, the channel where real stories of entitlement, justice, and sweet, satisfying revenge come to life. Today's story is one for anyone who's ever dealt with a nightmare neighbor or been dragged into ridiculous HOA drama. Trust me, if you've ever had to defend your own property, or stand your ground against someone who thought rules didn't apply to them, this one's going to hit home. And hey, if you enjoy stories where karma hits back hard, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, because we've got plenty more unbelievable tales coming your way. I've lived in this neighborhood for nearly a decade, and up until recently it was the kind of place you dream of settling down in: quiet streets, well-kept lawns, friendly nods from neighbors walking their dogs. I bought my home after years of saving, and I took immense pride in every inch of my property. My front yard was simple but neat, with a sturdy white fence marking the boundary, a freshly paved driveway, and a backyard that was my personal sanctuary. I'd upgraded parts of the landscaping myself, planted hedges, and even built a small patio space for barbecues and evenings under the stars. Everything felt peaceful, predictable, like home should feel. That is, until Karen moved in next door. From the very beginning, Karen's tone was off. She didn't introduce herself with a smile or a wave like most new neighbors. Instead, she walked over with a clipboard in hand and a scowl on her face. Her very first words weren't "hello" or "nice to meet you," but a pointed question about my fence line. There was this air of superiority about her, like she believed she'd been appointed to police the entire neighborhood. She spoke in a clipped, passive-aggressive tone, always referencing the rules, without ever explaining what those rules actually were. I remember thinking, wow, she's one of those, the kind of person who moves in and immediately starts acting like she owns the block. It didn't take long before Karen's passive-aggressive behavior started to show in full force. At first, it was little things. She'd make vague comments like, "Some people don't really understand property lines," while staring directly at my yard. Or she'd leave folded HOA pamphlets on my doorstep, even though I'd already lived here for years and knew the guidelines better than most. She'd compliment my garden in a way that felt more like a jab, saying things like, "It's cute how you try to keep it up yourself," as if my effort wasn't good enough. She never confronted me directly about anything serious, but she made sure to drop subtle hints that she was watching, judging, and looking for something to complain about. Karen had something to say about everything on my property, whether it was her business or not. She'd point out my solar garden lights and say they were too bright for the aesthetic of the neighborhood. My fence? According to her, it was a little too close to the line, and might need reevaluation. Keep in mind, that fence had been in place for years, well before she ever showed up. She even criticized the seasonal wreath on my front door, claiming it didn't match community standards. At one point, she actually suggested I remove a decorative gnome from my front yard because it looked too whimsical. It was as if she'd made it her personal mission to nitpick every detail of my home, disguising her obsession as concern for the neighborhood's appearance. What made it even more frustrating was how Karen constantly threw around HOA rules, like she was the president of the entire community. Every time she criticized something on my property, whether it was the fence, the lawn lights, or even the color of my mulch, she'd follow it up with, "It's in the HOA guidelines," or, "You really should check the rulebook." The thing is, she wasn't even on the HOA board. Not elected, not appointed, nothing. Just a self-declared enforcer with too much time and too much ego. I even confirmed it with a board member at one point, and they rolled their eyes, clearly used to Karen's antics. But that didn't stop her. She continued patrolling the neighborhood like she had a badge, misquoting rules and intimidating anyone who didn't fall in line with her personal preferences. Then came the big one, the fence. One day, Karen marched over, arms crossed, and insisted that my fence was too far over the property line. She claimed she had measured it herself, and that part of her land was being taken up by my fence. Mind you, this fence had been professionally installed years ago, approved by the HOA at the time, and had never once been an issue. But Karen was adamant. She pointed at the fence like it was a personal insult, demanding I move it back to its rightful place. When I calmly asked if she had a survey or any official documentation, she scoffed and said, "I don't need one. I know my property." That's when I realized this wasn't just nitpicking anymore. She was trying to rewrite boundaries to suit her own delusions. Not long after her fence accusations, I received an unexpected email from the HOA. To my surprise, Karen had contacted them with a formal complaint, filled with false claims about my property, violating multiple guidelines. She alleged that my fence encroached on her land, that my landscaping was creating a visual disturbance, and that I had unapproved decorations on display. It was laughable. Every point she made was either a flat-out lie or grossly exaggerated. I knew my rights, I knew the actual rules, and I had documentation for everything, from the fence installation to the HOA's original approvals. Still, the fact that she was willing to go this far, using official channels to push her false narrative, showed just how far she was willing to go to control what wasn't hers. Karen's obsession escalated when she actually suggested, no, demanded, that I move my boundary line. She claimed, with zero evidence, that my property marker was placed incorrectly and that I was technically using land that didn't belong to me. She handed me a handwritten map, yes, handwritten, with lines she had drawn herself, completely ignoring the actual, legal property survey I had from when I purchased the home. She insisted it was just a minor adjustment, and said I should do the right thing and move the fence back a few feet. At that point, it was clear she wasn't just being difficult, she was actively trying to steal part of my land under the guise of neighborhood concern. That was the moment I knew I had to get serious. Soon after her failed attempt to get me to move my boundary, Karen started bombarding me with passive-aggressive notices and emails. She'd leave typed letters in my mailbox with subject lines like, friendly reminder, or urgent HOA concern, though they clearly came from her and not the actual board. The emails were even more ridiculous, filled with screenshots of random HOA guidelines, underlined quotes taken out of context, and her own commentary accusing me of being non-compliant. One email even warned that continued inaction may result in escalation, as if she had any authority to enforce penalties. It was all smoke and mirrors, empty threats designed to pressure me into giving up land that legally wasn't hers. But instead of rattling me, it only motivated me more to fight back, the right way. At that point, I knew it was time to shut this down with facts, not arguments. So I went straight to my records. When I first bought the house, I had a professional property survey done, and luckily, I kept a copy of it in my files. I pulled it out, reviewed every detail, and then went even further by checking the county's public land records. Everything lined up perfectly, my fence, my landscaping, even the exact coordinates of the property line. I had rock-solid proof that the land Karen claimed was hers had always been legally mine. Armed with those documents, I knew I had all the ammunition I needed to stop her false claims once and for all, not just with the HOA, but legally, if it came to that. With all my legal documents in hand, I decided it was time to bring the real authorities into the picture, not Karen's imaginary rulebook. I contacted the actual HOA board and scheduled a meeting to present everything. I showed them the certified property survey, the official county records, and copies of the emails and notes Karen had sent me. To their credit, the board members were shocked, not just at the clear evidence, but at how far Karen had gone without any authority. They confirmed she wasn't part of the board, had never been elected to any position, and had absolutely no right to issue warnings or file complaints on their behalf. I also looped in a representative from the city's zoning department just to be safe, and they backed up my claim without hesitation. Finally, someone was listening, and Karen's little game was about to unravel. Even though the HOA and city officials were now on my side, I didn't want to take any chances, especially since Karen had already shown how far she was willing to go. So, I consulted a property lawyer to ensure every step I took was airtight. I shared all my documentation, from the survey to the emails, and the lawyer immediately confirmed that I was in the clear, legally and factually. He even drafted a formal letter, warning Karen that any further harassment, false claims, or attempts to intimidate me could result in legal action. It wasn't about being aggressive, it was about drawing a clear line that she couldn't cross anymore. And knowing I had the law fully on my side gave me the confidence to stop playing defense and take control of the situation. With everything in place, the official property survey, legal records, city confirmations, and a letter from my attorney, I had built an ironclad case. I submitted all the evidence to the HOA board in a formal response to Karen's bogus complaints. Not only did I prove that my fence and property lines were perfectly legal, but I also exposed Karen's complete lack of authority and her ongoing pattern of harassment. The board reviewed everything and issued a clear statement in my favor, dismissing her claims entirely. I didn't just defend myself, I proved, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that I was fully within my rights the entire time. And finally, the narrative shifted. Karen wasn't the neighborhood enforcer anymore, she was the one in violation, and everyone now saw the truth. Despite everything, the documents, the lawyer's letter, the HOA siding with me, Karen wasn't done yet. In a last-ditch effort to regain control, she filed a formal HOA complaint against me. This time, she tried to sound more official, using legal-sounding language and attaching blurry photos of my fence and yard as evidence. Her complaint claimed that I was willfully disregarding neighborhood standards and encroaching on adjacent property, even though the HOA had already cleared me of all violations. It was desperate, and honestly, a little pathetic. The board reviewed her complaint, saw right through it, and rejected it without even needing further discussion. Her formal attempt only made her look more unhinged, and showed everyone how far she'd go just to bully someone who dared to stand their ground. After her formal HOA complaint was dismissed, Karen's behavior took a darker turn. No longer able to push me around officially, she resorted to outright harassment, not just toward me, but other neighbors as well. She'd stand at the edge of her property glaring at anyone who walked by, muttering under her breath or shaking her head in exaggerated disapproval. Some of my guests mentioned that she took photos of them arriving at my house, and a few neighbors told me she had started showing up uninvited at their doors to warn them about me and my so-called rule-breaking. It became clear that this wasn't just about property lines anymore. Karen had made me her personal obsession. But the more people she tried to intimidate, the more isolated she became. What she didn't realize was that every attempt to harass only strengthened the community's support for me, and slowly but surely, she was digging her own hole. Despite everything, the documents, the lawyer's letter, the HOA siding with me, Karen wasn't done yet. In a last-ditch effort to regain control, she filed a formal HOA complaint against me. This time, she tried to sound more official, using legal-sounding language and attaching blurry photos of my fence and yard as evidence. Her complaint claimed that I was willfully disregarding neighborhood standards and encroaching on adjacent property, even though the HOA had already cleared me of all violations. It was desperate, and honestly, a little pathetic. The board reviewed her complaint, saw right through it, and rejected it without even needing further discussion. Her formal attempt only made her look more unhinged, and showed everyone how far she'd go just to bully someone who dared to stand their ground. After her formal HOA complaint was dismissed, Karen's behavior took a darker turn. No longer able to push me around officially, she resorted to outright harassment, not just toward me, but other neighbors as well. She'd stand at the edge of her property glaring at anyone who walked by, muttering under her breath or shaking her head in exaggerated disapproval. Some of my guests mentioned that she took photos of them arriving at my house, and a few neighbors told me she had started showing up uninvited at their doors to warn them about me and my so-called rule-breaking. It became clear that this wasn't just about property lines anymore. Karen had made me her personal obsession. But the more people she tried to intimidate, the more isolated she became. What she didn't realize was that every attempt to harass only strengthened the community's support for me, and slowly but surely, she was digging her own hole. After her passive-aggressive notes and confrontations crossed the line, I decided it was time to respond, not emotionally, but officially. I printed out copies of the certified property survey, the city's confirmation of my boundary lines, and the HOA's statement clearing me of any wrongdoing. I placed all the documents in a neat folder and delivered a copy to both the HOA board and directly to Karen's mailbox, with a cover letter from my attorney reminding her that continued harassment could result in legal consequences. I wanted her to see, in black and white, that every inch of my property was legally mine, and that no amount of bullying or false accusations would change that. It wasn't just about defending myself anymore. It was about sending a message: facts don't lie, and intimidation has no place in our neighborhood. When it became clear that Karen wasn't backing down, even after the HOA rejected her complaints, and I provided undeniable legal proof, I knew it was time to escalate things formally. With the help of my property lawyer, I had a cease and desist letter drafted and delivered to her. The letter laid out every instance of her harassment, from the false HOA complaints to the passive-aggressive notes and public confrontations. It made it crystal clear that if her behavior continued, I wouldn't hesitate to pursue legal action for harassment, defamation, and invasion of privacy. The tone was firm but professional, no threats, just facts and consequences. This wasn't just about defending my property anymore. It was about protecting my peace of mind and setting a boundary she could no longer ignore. After reviewing all the evidence, the property surveys, the legal documentation, and the cease and desist letter, the HOA board finally stepped in and made their stance clear. In an official response, they sided with me completely. They acknowledged that my property lines were accurate, my upgrades were fully compliant, and that Karen had no authority to enforce any rules. They even went a step further by issuing her a written warning for misrepresenting herself as part of the HOA and for filing false complaints. It was a major turning point. Not only did I feel vindicated, but the entire neighborhood finally saw Karen for what she was, a bully with no real power. From that point on, her influence completely unraveled. With the HOA now fully aware of Karen's antics and the overwhelming evidence stacked against her, they didn't just stop at siding with me, they took action. Karen received an official reprimand for her repeated false claims, harassment, and for misrepresenting herself as a board member. But it didn't end there. The HOA also issued her a fine for violating community behavior standards and disrupting neighborhood harmony. She was warned that any further incidents could lead to steeper penalties, including possible legal consequences or restrictions within the HOA community. It was the wake-up call she never saw coming. The same HOA she tried to weaponize against me had now turned around and held her accountable. And the look on her face when the board publicly addressed her behavior at the next meeting? Priceless. To put the final nail in the coffin of Karen's campaign against me, the HOA arranged for a licensed surveyor to visit the property and conduct an official review. I welcomed it. I had nothing to hide. The surveyor came out, measured everything meticulously, reviewed the existing records, and confirmed exactly what I'd been saying all along: the fence, the landscaping, and every inch of my property were perfectly within legal and approved boundaries. When the results came in, the HOA added the surveyor's findings to their official report, publicly stating that there was zero encroachment and that no changes were required on my end. This wasn't just a personal win, it was a professional, indisputable confirmation that Karen's entire crusade had been built on fiction. And now, she had nowhere left to turn. As the truth came out and the surveyor's report confirmed everything I had been saying, the tide in the neighborhood started to turn, and fast. People who had once tried to stay neutral couldn't ignore the facts any longer. Neighbors who had received her unsolicited warnings or witnessed her confrontations with me began speaking up. One by one, they started avoiding her, skipping her invitations, and some even filed their own minor complaints to the HOA about her disruptive behavior. Her once smug, self-appointed authority completely crumbled. What little social standing she thought she had evaporated. Community events no longer included her, neighbors stopped waving when they passed by her house, and the silence she had once tried to enforce on me now echoed around her own doorstep. It was like watching karma unfold, step by step, and all I had to do was stand my ground and let the truth do the talking. With all the evidence against her, from the official surveyor's report to multiple neighbor complaints, and my documented interactions, the HOA had no choice but to formally penalize Karen. They hit her with substantial fines for filing false claims, misrepresenting herself as a board member, and repeatedly violating HOA conduct policies. The penalties weren't just symbolic, they were financial and public. A notice of violation was mailed to every homeowner in the neighborhood as part of the HOA's transparency policy, and there it was in black and white, Karen's name, the rule violations, and the consequences. She was livid, but there was nothing she could do. Her power trip had officially backfired. The same HOA she had tried to manipulate had now made an example of her, sending a loud and clear message to the entire neighborhood: abuse of authority and harassment would not be tolerated. Karen's downfall reached its peak during the next HOA community meeting. What was supposed to be a routine gathering quickly turned into her moment of public embarrassment. As the board read through recent violations and disciplinary actions, her name came up, clearly and unapologetically. They listed her fines, her false complaints, her misrepresentation as an HOA official, and the results of the property survey that proved she was entirely in the wrong. The room was silent, all eyes on her, and for once, Karen had nothing to say. You could see the shock on her face, realizing that her lies and intimidation tactics had not only failed but had now exposed her to the entire neighborhood. It was poetic justice, not through yelling or retaliation, but through calm persistence and facts. She had tried to shame me, but in the end, she ended up shaming herself. As the dust settled and more homeowners began voicing their own concerns, the HOA decided to take one final step. They held a special vote to review Karen's involvement with the board. Even though she had never been an official board member, she had often acted like one, giving out fake warnings and manipulating rules to harass others. The board made it clear that misrepresenting oneself as an HOA official was a serious offense. After discussing her behavior and the damage it caused to the community, they officially barred her from participating in any HOA-related roles or committees moving forward. It was the final blow to her false authority. The title she had paraded around with wasn't just taken, it was publicly stripped away. Now, if she even tried to speak on HOA matters, people would just roll their eyes or walk away. Her reign of entitlement was over. With Karen's influence finally gone, and the HOA taking firm action, a sense of peace slowly returned to the neighborhood. People began to relax again. Neighbors who once kept to themselves out of fear of being targeted started chatting over fences, waving during walks, and even organizing small gatherings without worry. My yard, once the focus of ridiculous complaints, became just what it was meant to be, my personal space to enjoy. There were no more nasty notes, no surprise confrontations, and definitely no bogus HOA threats. It was like a dark cloud had lifted, and the community could finally breathe again. I even had a few neighbors stop by to thank me for standing my ground, saying it inspired them to speak up too. The best part? I could step outside, coffee in hand, look around, and truly feel at home, without drama, without tension. Just peace. Not long after everything settled down, I started getting quiet thank yous from neighbors I hadn't even spoken to before. Some would stop during their evening walks just to say how relieved they were that someone finally stood up to Karen. Others shared their own stories, how she'd left notes on their doors, confronted their guests, or tried to nitpick their property choices too. One elderly couple even brought over a batch of cookies, saying they had felt bullied for years but never knew how to fight back. It was humbling, honestly. I didn't go into this situation looking to be some kind of community hero. I just wanted peace. But hearing how my actions helped others feel stronger, more secure in their own homes, made it all worth it. It reminded me that standing up for yourself can sometimes empower others to do the same. Eventually, Karen went quiet. The notes stopped, the confrontations ended, and she no longer walked the neighborhood with that smug attitude she once carried like a badge. Word had it that she was furious over the way things played out, the fines, the embarrassment, the complete loss of control she once thought she had. Some neighbors said she was considering selling her house, and not long after, a for sale sign popped up on her lawn. It felt surreal. The woman who once tried to dominate everyone around her was now the one leaving. Whether it was the community pressure, the official reprimands, or just the realization that she no longer held any influence, Karen had finally given up. When her moving truck rolled away, it was like a final exhale for the entire block. No more chaos. No more drama. Just the sound of a quiet, peaceful street, exactly how it should have always been. Looking back on everything, I'm honestly proud of how I handled the situation, not with anger or spite, but with calm logic and patience. It would have been easy to lash out, to let her harassment drag me into a shouting match or a public feud. But instead, I kept records, documented everything, and let the facts speak louder than her drama ever could. Every step I took, contacting the HOA, checking property records, even consulting a lawyer, was done with the mindset of protecting what's mine, not escalating a fight. And in the end, that approach worked. The truth came out, justice was served, and I didn't have to compromise my integrity to make it happen. It's a reminder that sometimes the best weapon against entitled behavior is staying calm, staying smart, and letting the system, and karma, do the heavy lifting. Sometimes the best revenge isn't loud. It's calm, legal, and backed by facts. Never let entitled people push you around, especially when you're in the right. Standing your ground doesn't always mean raising your voice. Sometimes, it means doing your homework, trusting the process, and letting the truth shine through. Thanks for watching Voice of Tales, where justice and karma meet reality. If you enjoyed this story, hit that like button, drop a comment to share your thoughts or similar experiences, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life tales of accountability and sweet, sweet justice.